Tonight on the Sunday show, does Ukraine's future lie with Vladimir Groisman as Prime Minister, with Alyona Zhuk, a Kyiv Post staff writer, and Ilona Sologoub, an analyst at Vox Ukraine? Human rights in the former Soviet Union, an interview with Neistat, Senior Director for Research at Amnesty International. And finally, how Russia is stirring up intolerance in Europe, with Boris Reitsuster, a journalist and former Moscow bureau chief of German magazine Focus.
Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only primetime show explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I am Natalia Humenyuk.
And I'm Josh Kavensky, a reporter at the Kyiv Post. Tonight's show, we're going to illuminate the ongoing political horse trading over the Ukraine's next prime minister, possibly Vladimir Groisman. We're going to talk about human rights in the former Soviet Union, or lack thereof. We're going to go to Crimea and show you a clip of a parade there commemorating the 2-year anniversary of the annexation. And we're going to go into depth on how Russia is fomenting intolerance in Europe.
And before we start, I'll remind you that you can always go to the App Store and download our application of Hromadske International. With that, you can always be tuned and see what we propose there. Besides, you can also download our podcast on the Mixcloud. With that, you definitely can listen to all the discussions, interviews, but please follow us in all the social networks, Twitter, Facebook, and all the rest.
And we'll join you after a couple seconds with our next segment. The political crisis that seized Ukraine after former economy minister of Varis Abramovich's widely publicized resignation may soon be coming to an end. After weeks of speculation that former finance minister and US-born Natalia Yaresko could maybe take the place of Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who's currently prime minister, the talk has now shifted to Vladimir Groisman, the former mayor of Vinnytsia and current speaker of Ukraine's parliament. You can see his biography back there. It's an interesting one, isn't it, Natalia?
Yeah, so currently Mr. Groisman is considered to be really a close president loyalist, but before he joined the parliament, he was pretty well known with his business position. He been the speaker of the parliament currently, but before he was a minister of regional development, was the mayor of Vinnytsia, which is a town in the central Ukraine.
It's where Poroshenko is from, in fact.
Yeah, so that is the more or less could be considered a bit of the Poroshenko area, but and for that we also have here definitely the guests to discuss not just that. We do have here in our studio.
We have 2 guests with us tonight. We have Alyona Zhuk, a fellow reporter of mine at the Kyiv Post, and we have Ilona Sologoub, an analyst with Vox Ukraine. And they're both here tonight to join us to discuss what's going on in Ukrainian politics and whether or not we're really going to see Vladimir Groisman take the next position of prime minister. So, Alyona, you had a feature story in the Kyiv Post this past week. I think it would be great if you could explain to us what's really going on behind the scenes in politics, who's talking to who, and what are the next steps for Groisman becoming prime minister?
Well, as far as we know that after a couple of days after Yaresko finally confirmed that she would like to form a new cabinet and would substitute Yatsenyuk. Petro Poroshenko's bloc people came out with a suggestion that the only possible candidate for this seat can be Groisman, because apparently they think that there is not enough votes to back Yaresko, because we have no ruling coalition for now, and only the ruling coalition can nominate new prime minister candidate, and there is not enough people to form the ruling coalition that would back Yaresko. So now Groisman appears to be the only candidate, and tomorrow factions will meet to discuss whether they want him.
And so we've seen a lot of talk also that it's specifically Poroshenko who's pushing for Groisman to take the position. I mean, why are people saying that? Why do people think it's specifically the president that's advocating for Groisman?
Well, I think that because it was the candidate proposed by Poroshenko's bloc. So, and everyone knows that Groisman and Poroshenko have long history, and they work together. Groisman is loyal to Poroshenko, so I guess that's.
And before we go to speak about the, what we can expect from this government in case, what are also discussion while you're writing and preparing your reports that, it was more or less clear the popularity of him, it's pretty low. We can't bring an exact polls, but there is a huge support of current finance minister Yaresko, by the civil society, by different kind of the groups as a technocrat. So this kind of, and there was a very, very high expectation. So you really can't compare to those two figures. So really, what is also the discussion behind? Is it something more than he's just close to Poroshenko, or is he just a loyal person?
Even during the faction meeting when Lutsenko was proposing...
We'll remind Lutsenko, the head of the faction.
Head of faction, yeah, Poroshenko's bloc. I talked to lawmakers even from his bloc who were hoping that it would be Yaresko. But as many analysts, Ukrainian and not Ukrainian, say that there was a risk that Yaresko would form the really independent government that wouldn't be controlled by president and...
Ilona, Vox Ukraine is famous also from analyzing the economy, the reforms, and also keeping an eye on what the expectation of the Ukrainian business. So are there any expectation of the Prime Minister Groisman? What are the, what can you say on that? And especially on who would be, are there any expectation who could be the Prime Minister, and what depends on that?
We haven't done any surveys or any polls of business, so we can say about expectations of the business. But definitely, I personally and many of my friends like Mr. Yaresko for what she's done, for how she consolidated the budget and pushed through some of the financial reforms. Although there was a huge conflict, for example, about the tax reform, but still she managed to do some quite good things. As for Groisman, we don't really know his economic views, whether he's left, right.
So how come we don't know his economic views at all? Can we really at least guess from what had been explained?
Or from what he's done in Parliament as a speaker? I mean, is there anything consistent that you can kind of extract?
Well, as a speaker, he was quite okay. I can't say that he was a brilliant speaker, but he was more or less okay.
But really, I would really go into deep to that. So we really do not understand what is his economic views or economic platform or anything.
He didn't express any, at least I don't know anything that he publicly said about his economic views. Well, he was a good mayor of Vinnytsia. He introduced some e-government elements of e-government system there. So we can say that he's quite progressive. But as for the entire economy, there is no guarantee that a person who was a good mayor will make a good prime minister.
But I would just clarify for our foreign audience that he was a good mayor during the time of Yanukovych, still, which was very rare case of having a progressive mayor. So there was this kind of a good image of him before he has joined the government, meaning like a separate image before connection to the president.
There's a sense of comparison there. But, what's also going on in the background of all of this is the ongoing lack of a loan from the IMF. It's, I think, 2 months later than it was initially expected to be, and a lot of observers have sort of said that, well, if Hromadske is prime minister, then Ukraine would be more likely to have consistent loans from the IMF. I mean, what do you all think? Is that a reasonable argument, or do you think that there would be more Western creditors who would be likely to continue giving the loans even with Groisman as prime minister?
Well, everything is possible with Groisman. I think that IMF doesn't care much about who is the prime minister, about the name of the prime minister. They care about what the prime minister does. And they have the IMF program, which clearly states what should be done. And if the prime minister and the government in general performs what is written in that program, then there should be no problem with the IMF.
And Ilona, that's very interesting. But coming back to Hromadske, to current finance minister, if there is kind of a support of her, why then she is, also she probably could be considered a good financial minister for the country like Ukraine. But also, is everything so good with her? What are her weak and strong points? It doesn't mean that if the financial minister is good and doing well with IMF, it's enough to be a prime minister.
The prime minister jobs, the primary job of prime minister is talking to the parliament, is getting political support of the reform, so that neither the president nor the heads of parliamentarian factions can interfere and can say, okay, we don't support the initiatives of this ministry or that ministry. So maybe Groisman will do that, but...
Yeah, he knows lawmakers. Like he's been working with them for a long time now, and he knows their weak and strong points and how to negotiate with them and maybe find some ground for understanding. Or, like he did a couple of times while being a speaker, he pushed some not very pro-European, pro-democratic laws, like for example the situation with the law about electronic declaration, like asset declarations, and that was then vetoed by president, and also this law that was called dictatorship bill that suggests that faction leaders can just clean up their lists of lawmakers. So he pushed these unpopular bills through to make lawmakers vote. So probably it might imply that he will understand.
But that's not how you work with the parliament, right? You have to convince, you don't have to push something through.
No, I'm not saying that this was a good thing to do. I'm just saying that we can suggest that he knows how to do that.
So in a sense, he can provide stability because he knows how to work with the parliament and get things through, whether people like it or not.
Yes, something like that.
And before we go, that was not the only the issue with discussion who is who could be a possible prime minister. It's not just one big issue of this week. We frankly had been expecting maybe something would happen already on Friday, but there were a number of other issues. There were a couple of MPs who'd been expelled from the President Poroshenko faction for accusing the faction of corruption and some kind of the elite of the faction of the Poroshenko bloc. So there are currently a lot of discussion about that the President Poroshenko is strengthening his vertical. That we would discuss definitely in the future programs. And for instance, we would have the photo of this man, Igor Kononenko, who is MP from the President Poroshenko bloc. He is not the only one. And it's a question to you, Alyona. We really hear about the split in the President Poroshenko bloc between this kind of a younger people who probably would, support Hromadske and for technocratic government, and also kind of the group which is very close to the president and which probably would push forward Groisman, who are formally MPs but have a really close relations to the president. How strong is the position of these people? How do you hear? What do you know about this discussion?
Well, it's difficult to say how strong are their positions, like the people who were supporting Hromadske, because some of them are not, like, they have not decided whether they will support Groisman. So some of them stay like inside the faction and trying to interfere and to join at least, or to reveal for journalists and for people some insights that have been covered by leadership of the Poroshenko's bloc faction. For instance, it was said that Groisman was a person decided by the faction, but then, like Sergei Lещенко and Nayem, they were saying that, come on guys, no one discussed anything. And even like the leader of faction, Lutsenko, he went out and said that it was a mistake, it was my suggestion, so we will also discuss it on faction. So there is, again, like, they're just helping to do something to bring this discussion outside of the, like, president's cabinet or Poroshenko's faction. So they're helping in that way at the first place.
Okay, so thanks a lot for trying to explain this complicated story for our foreign audience. We'll follow it. It's not just about economy, it's still a lot about the politics. And we discussed the ongoing political crisis with Alyona Zhuk from Kyiv Post. She's a staff writer there. And Ilona Sologub, the analyst of Vox Ukraine. And we'll come back in a minute.
It's been nearly 2 years since the war with Russia began in Ukraine. Human rights monitors continue to monitor an ongoing, perpetually deteriorating situation on both sides. But Hromadske this week sat down with Amnesty International Senior Research Director Anna Neistat to talk about the group's monitoring and research of ongoing human rights violations by both sides in Donbass.
There are quite a few issues currently in Ukraine that we are concerned about, and they have to do both with those violations that we believe are committed by the Ukrainian state and those that are committed in so-called Donetsk Republic, Lugansk Republic, and in Crimea. If we're talking about Ukraine, one of the key concerns that we have is the unfinished business of investigations and accountability. If we're looking into investigations into Euromaidan events, we see that very few investigations have been opened, and compared to the number of cases that have been documented, and even fewer have resulted in tangible outcomes. The situation in Crimea remains incredibly tense, and just recently, Amnesty International voiced its concerns about the proposed closure of Mejlis, about ongoing persecution of Crimean Tatars, and general overall state of repression of civil society. And finally, a fairly big issue that we are worried about, although I would have difficulty citing particular cases in this situation because the investigation is still ongoing, is the reality of post-war and post-conflict situation in the East. And I say post-conflict with significant hesitation, because it is very difficult to claim that this conflict is over. As we know, shelling continues, be it sporadic, but it does result in destruction, for example, of civilian property in certain villages. But also what I'm sure you know about, because it is being reported in the media, is the tactics of so-called dirty war by both sides, which means disappearances, arbitrary arrests, and overall repression against those who are believed to, in some way or another, collaborate with the other side. Of course, in addition to all of that, there is a growing concern about the state of freedom of speech, freedom of the media and civil society. in Ukraine, as we know that, and again, that concerns both the territory that is controlled by the Ukrainian forces and those that are controlled by the other side. We know about the situations where journalists have been stopped from entering these territories, working there, or even arrested. And of course, this is of grave concern to us. When it concerns situation is in the east, this territory is controlled by the so-called DNR and LNR. From what I understand, it has become increasingly difficult for journalists, for independent observers to access these territories from 2016. On the Ukrainian-controlled territories, we so far have not faced any major difficulties. But again, I don't think it's time to relax, because the situation could change very quickly. Now, of course, there is not much talk about the freedom of media in Russia. Most of the independent media have been closed or face very significant difficulties in operating. But it's worth remembering that it actually started with the war in Chechnya, that the first media that started experiencing censorship and closure were the ones who had very active position on the war in Chechnya. The same goes for NGOs and civil society organizations. Some of the first ones, such as Russian-Chechen Friendship Society, were the ones that were dealing with the situation in Chechnya. Memorial, that is facing Memorial, it's a big, one of the largest Russia's human rights organizations that is under a lot of fire and pressure right now. They were the ones who worked very actively in Chechnya, and the first difficulties they faced were right there, including one of their key members, the director of the office, being killed in Chechnya. And that goes into many other issues that I think are affecting where Russia is going. Foreign policy. In the long run, I think the situation in Chechnya had very serious effect on Russia's foreign policy and how it positioned itself in the global war on terror and the benefits it reaped from it.
Why do you think that the Ukraine runs the same risk with non-controlled territories?
I think the risk is there. I don't think Ukraine is there yet. I would never say so. But I think it's when you start seeing some of the reactions in the media, in the social media, to, for example, those who dare to express the point of view that is not exactly in line with the official line of the Ukrainian government. And again, so far it's fairly subtle, with few exceptions, but it's definitely there. When you see, for example, even in our work, when we dare to criticize Ukrainian authorities, we get a lot of criticism. Not to the point of being closed or facing any major difficulties in our work, but again, it all starts in a subtle way, or in some cases not so subtle, but I think the danger is there, and that's where I think it's important to look at Russia's experience right now, even though it's different. It's not exactly the same.
So this month we also mark the anniversary of the occupation Crimea by Russia. And though it's pretty impossible for the Ukrainian journalists to work there, today was the day when there was the last Ukrainian paper had been closed down.
And yet Hromadske, we managed to send a couple journalists over there.
As always we do.
We tried and we succeeded, I guess, yeah.
So this video we would show you is just one of many. Because in fact it's really, really little, very few videos you can really watch what's happening,
And I mean, it's really interesting what they saw, because at least when in the West, when you hear about Crimea, you sort of assume that everybody there was against it. And at least the people they talked to, they had mixed feelings. But there were some people who seemed deluded. They seemed kind of crazy, but at the same time, they were in favor of the Russian occupation.
No, but it's what the story we're going to show is the official celebration of the annexation. So there was currently today, all the demonstrations are officially forbidden in Crimea. So, any public gathering are against the law, but sometimes they do exception for this celebration. And what interesting was for me to watch this video and to see sometimes the people I've mentioned, exactly the same people who were there at the demos 2 years ago.
It's almost as if they were being paid to be there or something.
No, it's almost maybe they are a bit of a mascots, but that is a very interesting video our correspondent had filmed in Simferopol, in the capital of the occupied Crimea, and here it is, this video for you.
Полчаса мы стоим сегодня.
Молодой, знаешь, кто это идет? Видишь эти серенькие дома? Это ополчение. Держим среди!
Ура! Не слышу, детишки!
Парад сегодня такой был красивый, да.
Ой, референдум. И даже от уроков освободили. Состоялся референдум,
Да.
наши родители были рады.
Просто нас на демонстрацию показательную, да, пригласили нас. Та, которая до Майдана была, да, Украина. Потом нет.
Конечно. Патриотизм? Я даже не знаю, как правильно ответить. Это сложный вопрос.
Это чувство гордости за свою родину.
Знаковая дата, которая нами будет отмечаться так же, как и День Победы. Я лично в этом не сомневаюсь.
Именно порыв крымчан был услышан великой Россией. Я уверен, что украинский народ справится с этой болезнью, выздоровеет и вернется в лоно русского мира.
Это за защиту Крыма. А это за воссоединение Крыма и Севастополя. Люди жалуются, некоторые там очередя, там может дороговизна какая-то. Но я думаю, что это все время же. Это как бы, ну, неизбежно.
Простите меня, пожалуйста. Спасибо.
В России уже давно не было в руководстве государственника, который по крупицам будет собирать народы. А мы сейчас чувствуем, что наша страна собирается. И борьба с терроризмом в Сирии – это тоже этапы этого же пути.
Сам родился вообще на Дальнем Востоке, а в Крыму с 91 года. Изменилось все очень кардинально, скажем так. Как говорил Иосиф Виссарионович, жить стало лучше, жить стало веселей.
Скрытая камера.
Ваше настроение?
Хорошее.
Простые словами, охуенно, а самыми лучшими чудесная, классная Россия, вперед, мы за Крым.
Раз, два, три, калина чорня,
Сегодня наехали велосипедом, блин.
раз, два, три, калина чорня,
The The ongoing refugee crisis in Europe has upended politics in the European Union. People fleeing the civil war in Syria and violence elsewhere in the Middle East have fled through the Balkans into Central and Western Europe. We have a map that we're going to show you, showing the paths that they take usually. You can see that they're going up through the Balkans. This is showing the Mediterranean route, which also accounts for a lot of the North African immigrants.
Yeah, obviously from Libya, and not just, because a lot of people from Sub-Saharan Africa go to Libya. So, as we know, for a while there was the, as everybody knows, definitely there were a lot of people coming to Spain, Italy, and Greece. But now, many more people have started to come. We are Eastern Europe.
Right, Eastern Europe. And the one interesting thing is that the media has sort of, especially particularly the Russian media, which we're about to have an interview on, has made it sort of seem like these hordes of people from the Middle East have swarmed Central Europe, including Germany. But we have a map showing the number of people who actually received a permit to stay that I think we can put up for you. And you can see that, yes, Germany has received the most, but in terms of the aggregate overall number of millions, it's less than you would think.
But what is interesting also, you see with the green colors, there are Eastern European countries. In a lot of them, there are almost no Syrian or other refugees. If you go to the application, sometimes there are 15 people who had applied, really small numbers. But there is an interesting issue I've discussed with Boris Reitsuster, who is the former Moscow bureau chief of the magazine Focus, a German journalist who spent almost 2 decades in Russia, how this fear of refugees is used by the Russian television, by the Kremlin television, in many countries, but especially in Germany, where we have 3 million Russian speakers. And this map, it's somehow, when we talk about Eastern Europe, what is interesting, that it's not all about just Germany. There is something about exploiting this,
it's also interesting.
Old authoritarian societies, which are not really used to living together with the others.
And you can see from this map, though, that in terms of relative numbers, some of these countries, former authoritarian Eastern European ones, are actually receiving some of the least amounts of immigrants compared to Central Europe and Western Europe, which has dealt with it somewhat better.
So please watch this interview with Boris Reitsuster, who speaks about this refugee hysteria in the Russian television, explaining how dangerous it is to be currently in Germany because of the refugees, and also explaining how this could possibly influence German politics and the split between Angela Merkel and her other politicians. So please.
You have to consider that there's about 3 or 4 million Russian-speaking people in Germany. It depends on estimates. And Russian propaganda is doing a really hard job. And if you watch Russian TV now, you get the impression that in Germany it's nearly impossible to get out of your flat without risking your life or without risking being raped if you're a woman, and that these refugees are absolutely dangerous. And even I got some calls from my Moscow friends who say, "Oh, you're in such a danger in Germany, don't you want to come back to Moscow?" And because we are safer here. And so I think they're trying to put oil on the fire in Germany. No, we don't have a fire yet, but they try to play with the fire. And I think Germany plays a key role, because Germany, with its 80 million population and with a very strong chancellor who is from Eastern Germany, who knows how KGB is working, who knows Eastern Europe, Germany plays a key role in the sanctions, and Germany plays a key role generally in the politics towards Russia. And I think that Putin is tired of Merkel, and he would love to get rid of her, and he tries to get rid of her.
But if we go back to the refugee crisis, so what are the exact messages, and how it's, what are the Kremlin media, the official Russian media, doing? So there was this famous case of Lisa. Maybe you would explain the girl which had been told in the Russian
I think
media she's raped and she hadn't been.
It's the same methods like you had it in the Ukraine, because it's always lies, it's alarming people, it's telling some horrifying stories which are not true, just to put people in fear, to make them anxious, and they use singular cases like this invented rape of a 13-year-old. There was a girl in Berlin went lost, and Russian propaganda made a huge case out of it, that the 13-year-old girl was raped by refugees, and the German police did not report this crime, and that they told the girl to keep silent because crimes of refugees aren't reported in Germany, and it was a huge issue, and there was even a demonstration in front of the office of Angela Merkel, of the German Chancellor, and it was a demonstration which was obviously orchestrated, which was organized, and you had these typical signs of Moscow organized demonstrations there. And if you watch Russian television now in Germany, you really get the impression that Germany nearly is a failed state, and that Europe is sinking down under this massive aggression of refugees, and there will be soon an Islamization of Europe, and they even call it the end of Europe, and it are some apocalyptic images they are drawing.
You said that the Putin is so much not getting along with Merkel, but what are the other political forces? Because we could also hear that Germany, you have a lot of these Putin-Versteiners, people who want to get back to the business as usual. How strong and how powerful?
On the one hand, you have Merkel, but she's in a big coalition with the Social Democrats, and Social Democrats are still under the influence of Gerhard Schröder, who is an ally of Putin, very close to him. Steinmeier is a buddy of Schröder. Gabriel, the deputy chancellor and head of Social Democrat Party, is also quite close to Schröder, and they are very friendly towards Putin, and so there is some kind of cut. So you, on the one hand, you have hardliner Merkel, and on the other hand, you have the Social Democrats who are appeaser and who always try to get appeasement, and so German government, I think it's quite paralyzed in its politics towards Russia because of these different forces inside. Big things, it's like in Germany always, when I say that it's a war in eastern Ukraine, that it's Russian occupied territory, and people say me, no, it's not the case, and they can even say, you see, in Ukraine, officially, even Ukrainians don't say it's a war, and they don't say it's occupied, so I think even here your politics are quite in a denial, and even in the Savchenko case, it would be easier if you would call things by its name, yes, and unfortunately, it's still called an anti-terrorist operation, which is absolutely far from the facts, yes, because it's not terrorism, it's an invasion of a foreign country. And on the other hand, I think that it's very, very important that people don't get depressed and say, oh, second time we had a revolution, and again it's in danger, and many things going wrong, that people still control their governments, that they are ready to fight and ready to fight for the right, and ready to go to the street again if government really would fail.
So that's your kind of an impression here in that way. Okay, and thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch our show tonight. We have one more video, but I'm Josh Kavensky, reporter at the Kyiv Post. You can follow the Kyiv Post for detailed print coverage of Ukrainian politics and the world around, and you can follow Hromadske for TV segments on Crimea, on Ukraine, on all of Eastern Europe.
And before saying goodbye, we'll leave you with one of the also very important video for us as a Ukrainian journalist this week. Jurgen Godsey, who is a famous Ukrainian journalist which had been killed 15 years ago in 2001. he had there were the funerals of him for 15 years. His body hadn't been buried. That was a very important story for the Ukrainian journalism. I mean, his murder, his allegedly had been, or his killing had been ordered by the former President Kuchma. But till now, we do not have people who called the hit. They haven't been prosecuted. And finally, this year, there was a permission by his family to bury Georgi, who probably started online journalism in Ukraine. And please watch this farewell ceremony, which is the end of part of some kind of a very, it's not yet the end, but still ending of some very, very important story for this part of the world. And I say goodbye.
Для мене Георгій – це дуже красива людина, прекрасний журналіст, безкомпромісна людина. І, скажімо, нічого дивного в тому, що його вбили, немає. Дивно, як він стільки багато встиг зробити.
Рідні Георгія Гонгадзе відчувають полегшення від того, що тіло Георгія буде поховане з гідністю, на яку заслуговує кожна людина. З похованням Гії не припиняється справа Гонгадзе. Замовники його вбивства повинні рано чи пізно бути засуджені за законом. Верховенство права є шляхом до встановлення справедливості в суспільстві, а утвердження свободи слова і демократії в Україні буде найкращою пам'яттю про Георгія.